She stopped the commander's mid-strike blow, and his armor shattered before his hand reached her. The sky above New Sol Station turned dark. Not the darkness of night, but the darkness of something massive blocking out the sun. A shadow fell across the entire city as the Krell Empire's battlecruiser descended through the atmosphere like a metal god coming down to Earth. The ship was so large that it looked like a small moon falling from the stars. Alarms screamed everywhere. Red lights flashed in every corridor. People ran in every direction, trying to find safety where none existed. Commander Vorn stood at the front of the invasion force. He was not like other Krell. He was taller, stronger, and more decorated than any soldier in their entire empire. His exoskeleton armor was made from orichalcum, a metal that had never been broken. Never been damaged, never been defeated in 10,000 years of Krell history. This armor had protected him through 100 battles across 100 worlds. Every scratch, every dent told a story of victory. The armor was not just protection. It was a symbol. It was a promise that the Krell were superior, that they could not be stopped, that they would rule the galaxy forever. The orbital defenses of New Sol Station collapsed in minutes. One by one, the human defense stations exploded in brilliant flashes of light. The Krell ships fired their weapons with mechanical precision. There was no passion in the attack, only efficiency. To Commander Vorn, this was not a battle. It was work. It was routine. How many human stations had he destroyed? How many human colonies had he conquered? He had lost count centuries ago. In the research laboratory deep inside the station, Dr. Haywan heard the explosions. She was a small woman, not tall or strong by human standards, but her mind was sharp and quick. She had spent 15 years studying the nature of matter itself. Her team had been working on a project called Neural Resonance Field Technology. The idea was simple, but revolutionary. They wanted to use the human brain to create waves of energy that could temporarily unstabilize the molecular bonds in materials. On paper, it looked good. But in practice, the technology had always been too dangerous. The test subjects had lost consciousness. Some had suffered brain damage. The project was supposed to be shut down next month. But there was no next month. Haywan watched the screens in the lab as the Krell soldiers made their way through the station. They moved with perfect coordination. They did not hesitate. They did not show fear or doubt. They simply moved forward, and everything in their way was destroyed. Captain Teo appeared on the communication screen. His face was pale and covered in sweat. He told everyone to evacuate, but there was nowhere to go. The Krell controlled the landing bays. The escape pods were already destroyed. The only direction anyone could run was down, into the lower levels where the machines hummed in the darkness. Haywan looked at the neural resonance field equipment. All the years of work. All the failed experiments. All the close calls and near disasters. The technology could work. She knew it could. But using it on a human being, on herself, without years of testing and preparation, would be incredibly dangerous. It could kill her. It could destroy her mind. But if she did nothing, the Krell would kill her anyway. If she was going to die, at least this way she might take some of them with her. She made a decision in seconds. There was no time for doubt or careful thinking. Her hands moved quickly through the lab, disconnecting wires and removing components. She found a small device, something the size of a crown, made of metal and circuitry. This was the neural interface. She had never tested it on a human being. She had only tested it on mice and rats and small animals. But there was no time to be careful. Haywan placed the device on her head and activated the sequence. The pain was immediate and intense. It felt like lightning was running through her brain. She wanted to scream, but she could not. Her jaw was locked tight. Her whole body shook and trembled. Colors flashed in front of her eyes. Every nerve in her body burned. This was the worst thing she had ever felt. This was worse than anything she could have imagined. Then it stopped. The pain faded. HFY could feel something different inside her mind. It was like a new sense had awakened. She could feel the energy inside her, waiting to be released. It was like a river behind a dam, pushing against the walls, wanting to flow. She understood now what the technology could do. She understood how to use it. The main corridor was where they caught her. HFY had made it only 3 levels up from the laboratory before she ran into the Krell soldiers. There were 5 of them, all wearing the same armor, all carrying the same weapons. They were taller than her, stronger than her, faster than her. But they hesitated for just a moment when they saw her. Perhaps they thought she was not worth killing. Perhaps they saw a small, injured human woman and felt no threat. That hesitation was their mistake. HFY reached out with her mind, and the neural resonance field projected outward from her body in waves. The 5 Krell soldiers collapsed immediately. Their armor sparked and failed. Their weapons fell to the ground. They were not dead, but they would not get up soon. She kept moving. More soldiers came. She stopped them too. It was like her body knew what to do, even though her mind could barely understand what was happening. The fear was gone. There was only action and reaction. There was only survival. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence fell across the corridor like a blanket. HFY felt it before she saw him. There was a presence in the air, something so heavy and powerful that it seemed to push down on her. Commander Vorn stepped around the corner slowly. He was enormous. His armor seemed to fill the entire width of the corridor. Every surface of his exoskeleton was covered with symbols and metals. He looked at HFY like a man looking at an insect. He did not speak. He did not need to speak. He simply raised his armored fist and began to swing it toward her head. It was the same movement he had made 1,000 times before. It was the movement that had ended 1,000 lives. His fist moved through the air with the weight of certainty. There was no escape. There was no defense. There was only the inevitable moment when his armor would make contact with her skull, and she would stop existing. HFY's hands came up, not to block him, not to fight him. It was instinct, pure and simple, and in that moment, with his fist centimeters from her face, she released everything. The neural resonance field exploded outward in a burst of pure energy. It was stronger than anything she had ever created before. It was stronger than anything her body should have been able to produce. It was the last reserve of energy that her nervous system had been saving, the emergency power that every living thing holds in reserve for the moment of death. The sound was like thunder. Commander Vorn's armor began to crack, not small cracks, not tiny lines of damage, but massive fractures that ran across the entire surface of his exoskeleton. The legendary orichalcum, invulnerable for 10,000 years, shattered like glass. The pieces exploded outward, and the force of his own strike channeled backward through the broken armor, sending shrapnel back at him with devastating power. Commander Vorn screamed. It was a sound that no human had ever heard before. It was the sound of a god realizing he was not actually a god. He staggered backward, his armor falling away in pieces, revealing the alien body underneath, bleeding and broken. HFY collapsed to the ground. She could barely see. Her mind felt like it was burning. Every nerve in her body was screaming in pain, but she had done it. She had stopped the unstoppable. She had broken the unbreakable. Behind her, the surviving Krell soldiers stood frozen. They stared at their fallen commander. They stared at the shattered armor. They stared at the small human woman who had just changed everything. The conquest of New Sol Station had just ended before it truly began. Part 2. The Aftermath and the Spreading Truth. The lower levels of New Sol Station became a place of confusion and fear. HFY regained consciousness in the medical bay, barely remembering how she got there. Lieutenant G1, A young soldier with a determined face and kind eyes was sitting beside her bed. Ji-won had been one of the few military personnel to escape the initial attack. She had found Hae-won collapsed in the corridor and carried her away from the chaos. When Hae-won opened her eyes, Ji-won immediately called for help. The medical equipment showed strange readings. Hae-won's neural activity was abnormal. Her brainwaves looked like nothing the doctors had ever seen before. They ran every test they could imagine, but they could not understand what had happened to her. The technology had changed her in ways that science could not yet explain. Hae-won's vision was blurry. Her head felt like it was full of static. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a whisper, weak and broken. Ji-won leaned close to hear her words. Hae-won asked about Commander Vorn. Was he dead? Ji-won shook her head. He was alive, but barely. The Krell had taken him away to their medical facility in one of their ships. They were trying to save him, but no one knew if he would survive. The news about what happened in the corridor was spreading quickly through the station. Whispers and rumors traveled through every room and every tunnel. A human woman had stopped the unstoppable commander. She had broken his legendary armor. The impossible had happened. Among the Krell soldiers, the reaction was different from the human reaction. The humans felt hope. The Krell soldiers felt something else. They felt doubt. Captain Teo found Hae-won in the medical bay later that day. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and a face that had seen many wars. He sat down slowly in the chair beside her bed. He told her that she had given humanity a chance. For the first time since the invasion began, the Krell soldiers were questioning their orders. Some of them had started to rebel against their commanding officers. Some of them had actually released human prisoners and allowed them to escape. This had never happened before in Krell history. But Captain Teo's expression was serious. He explained that the Krell Empire would not accept this defeat. They would send more ships. They would send reinforcements. They would do whatever it took to restore their honor and complete their conquest. What Hae-won had done was not a victory. It was only a temporary delay. The real battle was still coming. Hae-won tried to sit up in bed, but her body would not obey. The pain was everywhere. Her nervous system felt like it had been torn apart and put back together incorrectly. Every movement made her want to scream. She asked Captain Teo if there was any way to evacuate. Could they contact the fleet? Could they call for help? Teo's face became sadder. The communication systems were destroyed. The Krell had made sure of that. They were completely isolated. 3 days passed. Hae-won's condition slowly improved. The doctors gave her medication to help manage the pain. She learned that her neural enhancement was permanent. The technology had fused with her nervous system in ways that could not be undone. The doctors were amazed that she had survived at all. By all rights, she should have died. Her brain should have burned out from the electrical overload, but something in her physiology had adapted. Something in her had resisted the damage and survived. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened among the Krell forces. The soldiers who had witnessed Commander Vorn's defeat began to openly question the ideology of their empire. In Krell culture, strength was everything. A leader was only a leader if they were strong enough to defeat anyone who challenged them. Commander Vorn was no longer strong. He had been broken by a small human woman. This fact could not be erased or forgotten. No matter how much the Krell hierarchy tried to keep it secret, the truth was spreading like wildfire through the invasion force. Some Krell soldiers started to refuse their orders. Others demanded explanations. A few even began to talk about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the Krell philosophy of dominance through force was not the only way to live. These were dangerous thoughts. Thoughts like these could destroy everything that Krell civilization had built over thousands of years. Ji-won brought Hae-won a recording. It was intercepted communication between Krell commanders. They were arguing about what to do. Some wanted to execute Commander Vorn for his weakness. Others wanted to hide what happened and pretend it never occurred. Still others wanted to send more ships and conquer the station with overwhelming force to rebuild their shattered myth of invincibility. But there was one voice in the communications that was different. It was a voice that seemed to be thinking deeply about what had happened. This voice belonged to High Commander Zeal, the leader of the entire Krell invasion force. High Commander Zeal was saying something that no Krell commander had said in 10,000 years. He was saying that perhaps their empire needed to change. Perhaps their society needed to reconsider their fundamental beliefs about strength and weakness. HFY listened to these communications and began to understand something important. What she had done was not just about stopping one attack or breaking one piece of armor. She had struck at the very foundation of Krell culture. She had shown them that their superiority was not guaranteed. She had revealed that there were limits to what their strength could achieve. But she also understood that she was dying. Each day that passed, she could feel something burning inside her head. The neural enhancement was slowly destroying her. The doctor said she had perhaps a few months, maybe less. The technology was not meant for human biology. It was consuming her from the inside like a fire that could not be stopped. Captain Teo sat with her again, and this time he brought something with him. It was a letter from Commander Vorn. The Krell had allowed this message to be sent as a gesture of respect. In the letter, Commander Vorn wrote that he had spent his entire life believing that strength was the only thing that mattered. But in the moment when his armor shattered, he had learned something new. He had learned what it meant to face your own limitations. He had learned what it felt like to be weak. And in that weakness, he had discovered something unexpected. He had discovered the possibility of change. HFY read the letter 3 times. Tears ran down her face. She did not know if she was crying from pain or from hope or from fear. Probably all 3 at once. Jiwon held her hand and told her that her sacrifice was already making a difference. Already the Krell were changing. Already soldiers were questioning their orders. Already the impossible was becoming possible. But the most difficult battles were still ahead. The Krell Empire would not accept change easily. They would resist with everything they had. HFY knew that she was only one person. She was only one small human woman who had been given an extraordinary power for just a few moments. That power was already burning away inside her. But perhaps that was okay. Perhaps the real power was not in her abilities. Perhaps the real power was in the change that those abilities had created in the minds of everyone who had witnessed what happened. The war was not over, but it had transformed into something different. It had transformed into a question. And questions, HFY understood, were far more dangerous to empires than weapons. Part 3. The Hunted and the Seeker. Commander Vorn regained consciousness in the medical facility of the Krell flagship. The pain was immense. Every part of his body hurt with an intensity he had never experienced before. His armor was gone. His strength, which he had believed was invulnerable, had been revealed as fragile and temporary. He lay in the medical pod for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the small human woman who had done this to him. The doctors told him he would recover physically. His body was resilient. The Krell physiology was advanced and could heal from almost any injury. But the doctors said something else too. They said his mind would take longer to heal. They said that what he had experienced was a trauma unlike any other. They said that his entire sense of self had been broken along with his armor. Commander Vorn did not argue with them. He knew they were right. In the following days, as he recovered in silence, Vorn began to receive visitors. The highest leaders of the Krell Empire came to see him. They brought with them disappointment and anger and confusion. How had the greatest warrior of their age been defeated so easily? How could the legendary armor of Orichalcum have been shattered? What did this mean for the Krell philosophy? What did this mean for their entire civilization? Vorn did not have answers for them. He only had questions of his own. He spent hours thinking about the moment when his fist was about to make contact with HFY's head. He remembered the fear he had seen in her eyes. But he also remembered something else. He remembered seeing something that looked like acceptance. She was willing to die. She was not trying to escape or run away. She was facing him with the certainty that death was coming, and she was accepting it. In all of Vorn's centuries of life, he had never encountered anything like that. The enemies of the Krell usually tried to run. They usually tried to hide. They usually tried to fight back with inferior strength and lost quickly. But this human woman had stood her ground. This human woman had faced him knowing she could not win through strength alone, and she had found another way to survive. Meanwhile, in the lower levels of New Sol Station, Captain Teo was organizing a resistance. Not against the Krell necessarily, but for survival. They gathered the remaining survivors. There were not many. Perhaps 1,000 humans out of the original 10,000 who had inhabited the station. They moved through the tunnels and the secret passages, staying hidden from Krell patrols. But not all the Krell soldiers were hunting them. Some of the soldiers had begun to refuse their orders. These soldiers spoke quietly about what they had witnessed. They spoke about Commander Vorn being defeated. They spoke about a human woman with impossible power. They spoke about the weaknesses in their own beliefs. Captain Teo learned that he could trust some of these soldiers. Trust was a strange thing to develop between conquerors and conquered, but it was happening nonetheless. HFY's condition was becoming worse by the day. The neural enhancement was spreading through her body like a virus. Not a virus that would kill her with fever and sickness, but a virus of electricity and energy that was slowly consuming her from the inside. She spent most of her time in the medical bay now, connected to machines that tried to monitor and manage the damage. The doctors could not stop it. They could only try to slow it down. Ji-Won spent hours sitting with her. They talked about many things. Ji-Won told HFY about her family, who lived on a colony world far from here. She told HFY that she had joined the military because she wanted to protect people. She told HFY that what she had done in that corridor had changed what it meant to be a soldier. Now, soldiers like Ji-Won understood that protection did not always come through strength. It could also come through sacrifice. One day, without warning, Commander Vorn arrived at New Sol Station. He came alone in a small shuttle, against the orders of the Krell High Command. He landed in the docking bay and walked through the corridors, searching for HFY. The Krell soldiers who saw him did not stop him. They recognized him, and they saw something in his eyes that made them step aside. Captain Teo met him in the medical bay. Vorn's appearance was shocking. Without his armor, he looked smaller, more vulnerable. His skin bore the marks of his healing wounds. His eyes were haunted, but he walked with purpose. He had come to find HFY. When Vorn saw her in the medical pod, connected to all the machines, barely conscious, his expression changed. Something that looked like guilt and respect mixed together crossed his face. He asked Captain Teo what was wrong with her. Teo explained about the neural enhancement and how it was consuming her. He explained that HFY was dying slowly as a result of the power she had used to stop him. Vorn sat down beside the medical pod and looked at HFY for a long time. He did not say anything. He just looked. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and different from how commanders usually speak. He told her that in his entire life, no one had ever paid a price to defeat him. Everyone else who had ever stood against him had either run away or died quickly. But HFY was different. HFY had stood against him knowing that the victory would cost her everything. HFY opened her eyes. Her vision was still cloudy, but she could see Vorn's shape. She asked him why he had come. Vorn had no immediate answer. He only knew that he could not stay away. He knew that he had to see her. He had to understand what kind of being would sacrifice everything like this. The two of them talked for hours. They talked about strength and weakness. They talked about what it meant to be warrior. They talked about the difference between conquest and understanding. Vorn told Hay-Wan about the doubts spreading through the Krell forces. He told her that some soldiers were questioning their orders. He told her that the foundation of their entire civilization was beginning to crack, just like his armor had cracked. But he also told her that the Krell Empire was not ready for change. The old leaders, the ones who had held power for thousands of years, would not accept a new way of thinking. They would fight to preserve the old system. If the change happened, it would happen slowly through blood and struggle. Hay-Wan asked Vorn what he was going to do. He was no longer the invincible commander. He was no longer the symbol of Krell's superiority. He was just a warrior with doubts and questions. How would he survive in a civilization that valued strength above all else? Vorn looked at her and said something that seemed to surprise him as he spoke the words. He said that maybe he did not have to survive in the old way anymore. Maybe he could choose a different path. Maybe he could become something new, something that the Krell had never seen before. A leader, not through strength, but through the willingness to change. Before he left, Vorn took Hay-Wan's hand. He told her that her sacrifice had meaning. Even if she did not live to see it, the change she had started would continue. The galaxy would remember what she had done. After he left, Hay-Wan lay in her medical pod and wondered if he was right. She wondered if her death would have meaning or if it would just be one more tragedy in an uncaring universe. But something in his words had given her hope. And hope, she understood, was something stronger than any armor. Part 4. The decision in the Power Core days passed. The situation at New Sol Station remained tense and uncertain. The Krell had not launched another attack, but they had not left either. Thousands of Krell soldiers remained in orbit, waiting for orders. Communication between the Krell leadership had become chaotic and contradictory. Some commanders wanted to destroy the station completely and erase all evidence of what had happened. Others wanted to study what had happened. Still others wanted to negotiate. In the medical bay, Hay-Wan's condition continued to decline. The doctors now said that she had only weeks to live, maybe days. The neural enhancement was spreading faster than they could measure. Her brain was being slowly consumed by the electrical energy. She spent most of her time unconscious, suspended in a world between life and death. When she was awake, she felt pain that was beyond description. It was not the pain of an injury. It was the pain of her entire nervous system burning. Ji-Wan stayed with her almost all the time. Ji-Wan had taken a leave from her military duties to care for Hay-Wan. She held her hand when Hay-Wan was in pain. She whispered words of encouragement into her ear. She told her that what she had done mattered. She told her that she was a hero. But Ji-Wan's voice was full of sadness. Both of them knew that the end was coming. One night, Captain Teo came to the medical bay with urgent news. The Krell High Command had sent a message. They were demanding that Hay-Wan be delivered to them. They wanted to study what had happened to her. They wanted to understand how her neural enhancement worked. But the message also contained something else. It contained an ultimatum. If the humans refused to hand over Hay-Wan, the Krell would destroy the station and everyone on it. Teo had to make a decision. He could give them Hay-Wan, and the station would survive. Everyone else would be saved. But Hay-Wan would be captured and studied like an animal. She would spend her final days in Krell laboratories while scientists dissected her and examined her and tried to learn her secrets. Or he could refuse. He could keep Hay-Wan safe, but then thousands of people would die. The station would be destroyed. Everything would end in fire and death. Captain Teo brought this problem to Hay-Wan. He told her the situation. He told her that he would not force her to go, but he also told her that the weight of thousands of lives was on this decision. Hay-Wan listened to him through the pain and the fog in her mind. She asked him what he thought she should do. Teo looked at her with tears in his eyes. He said that he did not know. He said that for the first time in his life, he had no good choices. Every option led to suffering. Every path led to death for someone. HFY asked to see Commander Vorn. She did not know if he would come. She did not know if he was even still on the station. But she asked anyway. Vorn came within the hour. He had been in the lower levels, meeting secretly with some of the rebelling Krell soldiers. He had been planning something, though what exactly, he had not yet decided. When HFY asked to see him, he abandoned everything else and rushed to the medical bay. She told him about the ultimatum. She told him that she was going to die anyway. She said that she wanted her death to mean something. She told him that she had an idea, but she needed his help. Vorn listened carefully to what HFY wanted to do. Her idea was dangerous and desperate. It was the kind of idea that only someone who had nothing left to lose would suggest. It involved going to the power core of the station. It involved using her neural enhancement one more time to create a massive pulse of energy. It involved shutting down the entire station's systems and disabling all the Krell communication systems. If the plan worked, the Krell ships would lose contact with the station. They would lose their ability to coordinate the planned attack. They would have to choose between going ahead blind or retreating to regroup. It would give the humans time. It would give the Krell rebels time to grow stronger and organize better. But if the plan worked, HFY would die. The massive pulse would burn out her nervous system completely and instantly. There would be no recovery. There would be no second chance. She would simply stop existing. Vorn argued against this plan. He told her that there had to be another way. He told her that she had already sacrificed enough. But HFY shook her head. She said that she was already dying. She said that every day she stayed alive, she was in agony. She said that this way, her death would protect thousands of people. Vorn realized that he could not change her mind. He had seen determination in the eyes of soldiers before, but he had never seen anything like what he saw in HFY's eyes. She had made her decision. She was at peace with it. He asked her if she was afraid. HFY took a long time to answer. She said yes, she was afraid. She said that she was terrified of death. She said that she did not want to leave this life, but she said that she was more afraid of dying without meaning. She was more afraid of her sacrifice being wasted. Captain Teo and Jiwon helped carry HFY to the power core. It was deep below the station, in the section that had been least affected by the Krell attack. The huge machines hummed with the energy that kept the entire station alive. The temperature was hot and uncomfortable. The lights were bright and harsh. HFY was placed on the floor near the main power junction. Her body was thin and weak. She could barely move. But her eyes were clear. Her mind was focused. She told everyone to leave the room except for Vorn. She wanted him to be the last person she saw. Vorn knelt beside her. She reached out and touched his face. She told him that she wanted him to remember something. She wanted him to remember that strength is not just about force. She wanted him to remember that the most powerful thing a being can do is to make a choice about their own life. She wanted him to remember that there are things worth dying for. Vorn's face was covered in tears. He was a warrior who had been trained never to cry, never to show weakness. But in that moment, facing the death of someone who had changed him forever, he could not hold back the tears. HFY closed her eyes. She reached deep inside herself and found the neural enhancement. The fire was still there, burning and waiting. She had been holding it back, controlling it, managing it. Now she let it go. The power core of New Seoul Station exploded with light and energy. The explosion was not violent and destructive like a bomb. It was pure, brilliant, beautiful light. The entire station shook. Every light went out. Every system went dark. The Krell ships in orbit lost all contact with the station. Their sensors went blank. Their communications networks shut down. And in the power core, in that moment of brilliant light, Haywan stopped existing. She did not scream. She did not cry out. She simply stopped. Her consciousness faded like a candle being blown out by the wind. Vorn knelt in the darkness, holding her hand. He stayed with her long after she was gone. He stayed with her until the emergency lights came back on. He stayed with her because it was the only way he knew to honor what she had done. Part 5. The New Beginning. The darkness in the power core lasted for only minutes, though it felt like an eternity. When the backup systems finally activated, the light returned slowly, showing the destruction that Haywan's final sacrifice had created. The entire power core was damaged beyond immediate repair. But the main systems of the station were still functional. The Krell ships in orbit were blind. They had lost all communication with their forces on the ground. Captain Teo found Vorn kneeling in the wreckage. The Krell commander was holding Haywan's body, which was no longer warm. There was no outward sign of injury. She simply looked like she was sleeping. But her light had gone out forever. Teo stood silently for a moment. He was not a man who showed emotion easily, but at that moment, he allowed himself to grieve. He grieved for Haywan. He grieved for all the people who had died in the invasion. He grieved for the cost of survival. When Vorn finally stood up, his face was empty of expression. Teo had learned enough about Krell culture to understand that this emptiness was the deepest form of mourning. Vorn was not just sad. He was devastated in a way that his culture had no words for. Above, in orbit, the Krell ships were in chaos. The loss of communication had thrown their entire command structure into confusion. They did not know what had happened. They did not know if their commander was alive or dead. They did not know if the mission was still active or if something had gone wrong. Different ship captains began to make different decisions. Some wanted to attack blindly. Some wanted to retreat and regroup. Some wanted to wait for more information. But something else was happening too. The Krell soldiers who had been stationed on the station had begun to openly rebel. They had seen what Haywan could do. They had seen what Commander Vorn had done, setting aside his own power and reputation to come alone to the station. They had watched the destruction of the old certainties of their world. And they had realized that they did not want to go back to the old way. These soldiers gathered with Vorn and with Captain Teo. They formed an alliance that no one had thought possible. Krell and humans standing together with a shared understanding that the way of the past had to change. Vorn made a decision in that moment. He knew that the Krell leadership would try to hunt him down for what he had done. They would try to destroy him as a traitor and a heretic. They would do everything in their power to restore the old order and punish him for failing them. But he did not care anymore. Haywan's sacrifice had freed him from fear. It had freed him from the need to be strong in the old way. He took all the rebellious Krell soldiers and all the surviving humans and led them to the communication center of the station. He knew the codes. He knew how to broadcast a message across the entire Krell Empire. And with Haywan's sacrifice still fresh in his mind, he did something that no Krell commander had ever done before. He told the truth. In his broadcast message, Vorn described what had happened at New Sol Station. He described the invasion and the defeat. He described his armor being shattered by a small, weak human woman with an impossible power born from sacrifice. He told the Krell Empire that their entire philosophy of strength was flawed. He told them that he had learned more about true power in his moments of defeat than he had learned in centuries of victory. He spoke about Haywan. He described her courage and her choice to die rather than be captured and studied. He told the Krell that this was the kind of being they were trying to conquer. This was what humanity offered the galaxy, not superior technology or superior strength, but the willingness to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. And then he did something even more shocking. He announced that he was defecting. He was renouncing his position as a Krell commander. He was joining the humans in creating a new kind of civilization. A civilization where strength was not the only measure of worth. A civilization where understanding and growth and change were valued as highly as power. The broadcast echoed across the Krell Empire. Within hours, the response was overwhelming. Some Krell leaders were outraged. They declared Vorn a traitor and demanded his death, but others listened carefully to what he had said. Some of them began to ask questions. If Vorn, the greatest warrior of their age, could change his mind, perhaps there was something worth changing about. The rebellion grew, not a violent rebellion, but an intellectual one. More and more Krell began to question the old ways. More and more soldiers refused to follow orders that were based on conquest and domination. The empire that had held power for 10,000 years was beginning to crack, just as HFY's sacrifice had predicted. In the weeks that followed, the Krell ships in orbit eventually retreated. They did not retreat because they were defeated militarily. They retreated because their command structure had fallen into chaos. Half the ships wanted to continue the invasion. Half wanted to return to Krell space to deal with the rebellion that was growing at home. Eventually, the ones who wanted to retreat won out, and the entire invasion force withdrew. New Sol Station was no longer under siege. The humans who had survived the invasion emerged from the lower levels. They saw their station in ruins, their people scattered and traumatized, their future uncertain. But they were alive. They had survived against odds that should have been impossible. Jiwan stood with the others and looked up at the sky where the Krell ships had been. She thought about HFY. She thought about the sacrifice that had saved them all. She knew that HFY would never know that her death had worked. HFY would never know that the Krell were truly beginning to change. HFY would never know that the galaxy was different now because of what she had done. But perhaps that was the point of sacrifice. Perhaps the point was that the person doing the sacrificing did not need to know the outcome. Perhaps the point was simply to do what was right, even if that meant dying for a future you would never see. Captain Teo called a meeting with Vorn. They sat across from each other in a room that was slowly being repaired. Teo told Vorn that humanity would need to change too. They would need to learn to live with the Krell in a new way. They would need to find a way to trust a species that had invaded them. They would need to be brave enough to build something new rather than just survive. Vorn agreed with him. He said that both their species would have to learn how to be something different than what they had always been. He said that HFY had shown them the way. She had shown them that change was possible. She had shown them that the future did not have to be a continuation of the past. Months passed. New Sol Station was rebuilt. More ships arrived from human space and Krell space. Not warships, but explorer ships and transport ships and science vessels. The first real conversations began between the two species. They were difficult conversations, full of misunderstandings and pain. But they were conversations. And conversations, Vorn had learned from HFY, were the beginning of everything new. In a memorial garden that was built on New Sol Station, a statue was created. It was a simple statue of a small figure, arms outstretched, with light flowing from her hands. There was no name on the statue. Everyone who saw it knew who it represented. Everyone who looked at it remembered HFY and what she had given to them. Vorn visited that statue often. He would stand before it and remember the woman who had changed everything. He would remember her sacrifice, and he would remember his promise to her. He had promised to remember that strength is not just about force. He had promised to remember that the most powerful thing a being can do is to make a choice about their own life. He had kept that promise, and in keeping it, he had helped to build a future that HFY would have wanted. A future where understanding mattered as much as strength. A future where sacrifice was honored and remembered. A future that was different from the past because two species had learned to change. The conquest of New Sol Station had failed. But in that failure, something far more important had succeeded. The real war was not between humans and Krell. The real war was between the old way and the new way. And in that war, Haiwan had struck the first decisive blow. The rest was just the long work of building something new from the ruins of what had been.